Hello everyone and welcome back to my channel. So in today's video, I'm going to show you how to create this very simple checklist using PyQt5. So we're going to create this sort of to-do list or checklist. You can use it as either a to-do or anything else, where you can check and uncheck different items on your checklist. We also are going to create a toggle all button, which is going to toggle the checks or unchecks. So here, if I leave it like this, and as you can see, we have 3 checked and 2 unchecked. If I press on toggle all, it's going to flip all of the checks. This will enable us to actually see how we can manipulate the different checkboxes and the list widget using our Python code. What we're going to do is we're going to design this using QtDesigner. We'll design the first interface. Then we're going to actually use Python to write the code to call it, load it, and manipulate it as well. Finally, we're going to reformat it so it looks as you can see right now on the screen. Now, this video is totally beginner friendly. I'm going to walk you through everything related to PyQt5 and how you can actually execute it. However, the one thing I won't talk about is installing PyQt5 and QtDesigner. I already have a video for that, so just feel free to check that out. It's a very short video. As soon as you have PyQt5 and QtDesigner installed, we can get started and you can follow along with this one. So without further ado, let's just get started. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to use QtDesigner to create this interface. So as you can see, I have a starter interface in front of me. This is a main.ui file. So .ui files are a special type of files which we're going to use in order to manually create our interface using this drag and drop interface, which is QtDesigner. Now, how do you go about creating this exact same interface? Let me walk you through it step by step. So first, you're just going to go to File, New. Now, if you have just opened up QtDesigner, this dialog right here should be shown as soon as you open it up. Otherwise, just press File, New, as I just showed you. Then what you're going to do, you want to select main window. So our application has one window and this window is the main window. So this is of type Q main window. So I'm just going to select it and then I'm going to go ahead and press on create. This opens up this main window that is right here. For now, it's untitled. And as you can see, there are different components in the object inspector. So different objects inside this main window. So in PyQt5, this sort of works as a hierarchy. The main window itself is a large container. Then inside it, you have the central widget. So this is the central widget, this area with the dots that you see right here. This will contain all your other widgets. So this will contain the checklist, the button, and any other widgets that you choose to add. Otherwise, you also have the menu bar and the status bar. So the menu bar is this top part and the status bar is the bottom part. So I'm just going to right click and remove them because for this video, we're not actually going to use either the menu bar nor the status bar. Now that I've removed them, I only have my central widget inside the object inspector. So this is pretty similar to the UI I have right here, except that it's obviously much larger and it doesn't have the different components. So it doesn't have the 2 widgets that you see right here. The first widget we're actually going to need is this list widget. So not list view, it's the list widget. So I'm just going to drag it onto my screen. And as you can see, this is the list widget. It looks kind of similar. They're both blank squares. So for now, you don't actually really see anything or any difference. And the next thing we're going to need is a push button. So I'm just going to scroll here and go to input widgets. There we go. And I'm going to find the push button. Where is the push button? Oh, there it is. In the buttons. Sorry, not the input widget. So the push button is right here. Okay, so now that I've dragged the push button, you can see that I have sort of the 2 things that you have in the first interface as well. I'm going to come here, I'm going to actually relabel this button. I'm going to say toggle all so that we build a sort of interface that's very similar to the first one. Now, one key difference you can see is that this one is sort of resized in a much neater way and this one is sort of still messy. Another thing is if we go ahead and preview, so you can go here to form, preview, or you can just press Ctrl R. This is the same shortcut. You preview, this launches our interface. This is the way Python is going to see it. So it's a preview of how the interface will look like when we execute the code and we load it using Python. So as you can see, still messy. It's definitely not responsive or resizable. It's a very basic interface. Now, on the other hand, if I go back to the first UI and I go ahead and I preview this one, you can see that obviously it looks much better, but also if you resize it, it's resizable and it's responsive. as you increase and decrease the screen. So as I grow it and I shrink it, you can see that the interface changes. Obviously, this is much nicer and much neater, and it's a great advantage whenever we want to create an interface. So I'm going to come back to this one, and I'm going to show you how you can get the exact same result, make it responsive and resizable, just like the first interface. So I can just right click, go to layout, and I'm going to choose layout in a grid. So here, layout in a grid, and as you can see, it just laid it out in a grid. Now it looks very similar. The only difference maybe is if I want to resize it, I can just drag this, make it look the exact same. Obviously they're not equal, it doesn't really matter because it is resizable. So if I do preview it, so if I go to form and I preview, you can see it's resizable, and that is our goal. All right, so now I just showed you how you can create this exact same starter interface. If you were following along, you should now have this in your QtDesigner. Save it as main.ui in your target folder. Now I'll talk about that in a second. And yeah, that's really it for creating the basic UI. So let me just close this, and let's actually just stick with the first UI that I've created, and we're going to use this one to load it in our code. So after creating it, I'm going to go to VS Code, where I'm going to write some Python code that's going to enable me to load this UI file into Python and execute the application. How do I do that? So here, as you can see in my folder, the folder is called PyQt5 Checklist Tutorial. I have something called a main.ui file. Now this file is a type of XML file. So you can see right here, it's an XML file. It's a pretty special XML file. So it's saved as .ui, and it contains all the different widgets and UI elements that we created in QtDesigner. It contains them in this special format. So you can see you have the QMain window, which is our main window. Inside of it, you have the central widget, which is the one we saw. You have the QPush button. You have the QListWidget that you can see right here as well. So you have everything that we just designed manually using drag and drop. You have it generated as XML in this file. So this main.ui file is the main source of the UI, which we want to load in Python. Now, how do we load it? I'm going to show you right now. Now, if you've seen any of my previous videos or any PyQt5 tutorials on my channel, you know that I go through this in almost every video. So I show you how you can load this into Python and how you can sort of get everything from QtDesigner and put it in a Python class, as well as some attributes for this class. If you haven't seen any of these, that's totally fine because I'm going to walk you through it, but I just wanted a refresher for recurring viewers who have already seen this type of thing explained. Okay, so how am I going to do this? First things first, I'm going to just add some imports. Now let me actually justify these imports and show you where and how we're actually going to use them. Firstly, from PyQt5.QtWidgets, I'm going to import the Q application. So the Q application is what's going to enable me to launch a PyQt5 app, and it will actually be the reason we can actually see anything, we can actually see the interface that we designed. Next is the QMain window. So remember when we first created our interface, it was of type QMain window. So this is the type of interface that we have. Finally is QListWidgetItem. I'm not going to talk too much about this one right now because we're going to see it as I go further in the video, but essentially it's related to the list widget, which will represent our checklist. Next, what we have, we're going to import a function called loadUI from PyQt5.UIC. So loadUI itself is actually a function which will enable me to perform all of this loading that I was talking about previously. I'll show you how when we write it in the code. Next, we're going to import sys. You'll also see why as we write the code. And finally, we're going to import qtcore from qtconsole.qt. And again, you're going to see why later on in the video. So now that we've actually imported everything, what we want to do next is we want to define a class. Now this class, in my case, I called it main. In your case, you can call this class pretty much anything, give it any name that you like, as long as it inherits from QMain window. Now, what does inherit mean? This is actually a principle in Python object-oriented programming, or in object-oriented programming in general, in which a class inherits all the attributes and the functions of another class. So QMain window is the superclass of our class main. The reason we have to specify this is because our main.ui itself is a QMain window. This is our root widget, and we actually need to refer to it, we need to be inherited from it in order to load everything related to it and actually execute the application. So here, this is a definitely necessary step to have this inheritance part right here. If you're not familiar with Python object-oriented principles, that's totally fine. While I do recommend that you actually learn them, you can just go ahead and follow along with this video and understand that you have to specify the widget type when you're defining the class. Next, we want to specify the constructor. So the init function is the function that gets executed when you first create an instance of this class. We do so using def init, and then we specify self. What we want to do next is we want to call the superclass. So we want to call the constructor of the superclass. Basically here I'm saying get me the superclass of main. In this case, this is QMain window. Then call the init function of this superclass. So just call the init function of QMain window. Finally, what I want to do next is I will load the UI in this main.ui file, and I will load it into this class. Now what happens here is all of the different widgets that you saw, so like the button, the QListWidget, we can actually load them as class attributes to this main class. So this load UI function, this is where all the magic happens. Now I have a video where I go more in depth about this process and how it works. I'm going to link it in the description, so if you're interested, you can check that one out. But for now, this is all you need to know in order to load this UI into your Python code. All right. Next, what we want to do is we actually want to execute the application. So this block of code that you see right here will enable us to create a Q application. So here in my main part, so if name equal main, so this is where everything is executed, I create an app. This app will be of type Q application, and you have to pass the system arguments to this Q application. Next, you create an instance of the main class. In my case, I named it window. And you want to window.show. So this will enable the window to actually show on the screen so that the user can actually see it. Finally, you want to execute the application. So you just have to run this. And now if we run this code, so we run this file, you can see we launched this very same application, the one we designed in QtDesigner. We were able to launch it through VS Code or any text editor that you like. This is how we were able to launch it. We were able to load it in the Python code. Again, it's responsive, resizable. You can see here we have this list widget. It's still empty, it's blank, there's nothing in it. And there is the button, which says toggle all, which we're going to talk about later on in the video. So these are the basics of this program. So we were able to actually load the interface. All right. So we're done with the starter code, we're done with the starter interface. Let's actually start talking how we're going to build this checklist. So let's go back to Designer and let me actually show you something. If you double click on this QListWidget, you can have an editor which enables you to edit the list widget. Now if I press on plus, I can create a new item which I'm going to call maybe walk dog, and then another item which will be clean house. Okay, so these are my to-dos. And if I press on OK, you can see that they're now in this main.ui. So now let me go back to Python and actually rerun this. You can see that I have these two items right here. Obviously, this is not the best way because we're doing it manually through the interface. What I want to do is I want to do it through the code. So I can show you how this works using the code, how we can link the code and the interface together and actually display them. So let's actually go back. And I'm going to double click on this again. I'm going to press this minus sign to delete them. I'm just going to save. Now that I've saved, let's go back. Let's double check that it's all gone. There we go. Here we go. So we have nothing here. Okay, it's all gone. So how are we actually going to load our to-dos from the Python code? What I'm going to do is I'm going to first create a list. So this Python list is going to look like this, and it's going to contain a bunch of to-dos, and the variable name will be called to-dos. So I have walk dog, buy groceries, send email, call bank, and clean house, some very generic and basic to-dos. Now that I have these here, what I want to do is I want to loop over this list and add every single one of these to the list widget. So let's go ahead, and as you can see, you have 4 to-do in to-dos. So I'm looping over this list. What I want to do next is I create something called an item. This is the variable name, it's called item, but this is where I'm going to need this QListWidgetItem that we imported before. So the QListWidgetItem, now you know this is the QListWidget. You can see the type here. If I grow the object inspector, this is a QListWidget. Now when I specify QListWidgetItem, this refers to the single item, so each row in this list widget. So now I created one for to do. So now to do is going to be either walk dog, buy groceries, all these things. For each one, I create a QListWidgetItem. Now after creating this item, what I need to do next is I need to add this item to my list widget. So here I have self.todolistWidget.addItem, and you have the item right here. Let me actually first show you that it works, and then I'll explain this line of code and why it works. So let's actually run it again. So as you can see, we have all the to-dos from our Python list. We have walk dog, buy groceries, and so on. Now, how are they actually added here? Again, we looped over each to-do in to-dos. We created a QListWidgetItem, and then I said self.todolistWidget.addItem. Now, addItem is pretty self-explanatory. What we're going to do is add a QListWidgetItem to the QListWidget. Now, what does this here mean? If we go back to Designer, in my object inspector, to-do list widget is actually named by me. I named it to-do list widget. So here, in your case, this could probably be something like list widget. All right, so it's not necessarily something that is there by default. This is what I personally named it. So you have to-do list widget, and I can refer to it using self because of this load UI function. So load UI enabled me to load every single widget from my main.ui file into this class as class attributes. This is why I can refer to them using the self dot etc. So as you can see right here. All right, so this is why this works. So now that we've loaded all our to-do items, let's actually take another look at it. As you can see, we are actually missing the checkbox part. We need that because the point of this tutorial is to show you how to create a checklist. Okay, so how do I do that? I'm going to need 2 lines of code. First things first is I need to set something called a flag. So the flags is this. So we're going to refer to this part, and this will enable us to have this sort of checkbox for each list item. So here what I'm saying is set flags to the original or the default flags for this item. Now every widget in PyQt5 has some default flags. So here I'm saying that don't modify anything with the original flags, keep everything as is. Then add a new flag, which is qtcore.qt. So this is where we needed this qtcore import. qtcore.qt.item is user checkable. So this part, this is what enables me to tell PyQt5, hey, go ahead, add a little checkbox to every single one of these list widget items. Finally, after you add this, let me actually comment this line out. Let's actually run it, and I should show you why we need the second line. Nothing was added, nothing changes. We still have these different elements with no checkbox right here. Why is that? This is because while I did add the flag saying that, okay, this should be user checkable, the user should be able to check it, I need to set the check state. Now the check state can be one of 2 things. It's either checked or unchecked. Now checked, it means the state is checked, so the thing itself is checked. Unchecked means that there is no check in the checkbox. So let's actually show you how this works. So now let's run it. And as you can see, we now have a checkbox and we have a working checklist. So I can check and uncheck different items. And as you can see, I can select, check, uncheck. Now, because I said unchecked here, they started off as unchecked. Now, if I say checked and I go ahead, you can see it starts off with everything checked. So this is sort of the point why we need to set the state. So again, every time you need to add a sort of checklist to your list widget, you have to first set the flags, make sure that it's user checkable as we did right here. And second, you have to set a check state, either checked or unchecked, to make sure that there is sort of an initial state for these different checkboxes. So now we were actually able to load all of these to-dos, create a checkbox for each of them, and actually put them on our screen in this checklist. So we have officially created a checklist in PyQt5. Now I want to go one step further. You see this button right here. So this button, it's called toggle all button. What do I mean by toggle all? Well, I have a specific goal in mind. Let's run it again. Let me show you. So my goal is that for each of these items, so let's say for example, I had this, I want to press on toggle all and I want these to be switched. So in this case, walk dog and call bank are checked. I want them to become unchecked and I want the rest to become checked. So I'm sort of flipping everything around. I'm only doing this for the sake of example. I can't actually think of a real use case where this would be relevant, but this will enable you to actually work with these different checkboxes and show you how you can manipulate each of them individually to check and uncheck them through the Python code. So let's actually demo this and let me show you how it works. So first things first, I have this button. It's called toggle all. So this toggle all button, simply I have to call it using so you have to call it using the self.toggleAll button. So here. So now that I've done this, what I do next is say .clicked.connect. So I'm saying when this toggle all button is clicked, connect me to self.toggleAll. Okay, so here I'm saying that you have to connect me to this self.toggleAll. What do I mean by this? That I'm saying connect this button with this function that you see right here. So I'm connecting this button to a function. When the button is clicked, go ahead, execute the function. All right, perfect. Now that I've connected the two, what I want to do is actually perform the toggling. How do I do that? Firstly, I want to retrieve all the list widget items currently present on the screen. So there's a bunch of items on the screen. What I want to do is I want to go ahead and retrieve them. So here I'm getting all 5 or 6 of them. So I do so using the following. I create a loop and I loop over the to-do list widget.count. So for example, if I have 5 or 6, this will return the number 5 or 6. So in our case, we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So I actually have 5. So this count will actually be 5. And so I will range from 0 till 4 because this is how range works in Python. So now we're actually looping over the different elements in the to-do list widget. Now, how do I retrieve each single list widget item individually? Here's what I do next. I say item is equal to self.to-do-list-widget.item. So as you can see right here, I was actually able to retrieve this item. Now, item itself is a QListWidgetItem. Next, I'm going to check if the item check state, so item.checkState, so here I'm retrieving, is it checked or unchecked, is equal to qtcore.qt.checked. So if it's equal to checked, so if this item is actually checked, go ahead and set the check state to unchecked. So this is my target. If it's checked, set it to unchecked. And then we're going to do the opposite. But first, let me actually show you that this works. So if it's checked, go ahead and make it unchecked. Let's run it. And let's say I'm going to check buy groceries. So by default, now if we press on toggle all, what it should do is it should uncheck this one without doing anything to the others. So let's press on toggle all. As you can see, it was unchecked. This is because I said, if it's checked, go ahead, uncheck it. Now I'm going to do the exact opposite. So else, just set it to checked. Now let's run it. And we should have a complete toggle function. So let's actually check buy groceries and clean house. Now let's toggle it. And now you can see that it was the opposite. So these guys were unchecked. These guys became checked. Okay, so this looks good. This is exactly what we wanted. And this, now we have a functioning checklist in PyQt5, and we also have the button which toggles these guys. Now, one thing I actually want to fix, and it's a mistake that I noticed I did, is here this self.toggleAll button should not be within the for loop. This is not related. It's part of the init function, so it's definitely part of the constructor, but it's not part of the for loop. So please pay attention to that. I apologize. It's a mistake on my end, but yeah, that's really it. All right, so now we have a functioning checklist and we have the toggle button. Using the toggle button, I was able to show you how you can manipulate the checklist using Python code. Now, the final thing I want to do is I want to add some slight formatting to this checklist just to make it look more presentable and more attractive. So let's go ahead. And as you can see, I have the main.ui here. Now, if I right click on my central widget, so I'm just going to say change style sheet. So the style sheet in PyQt5 is where you can write some very CSS-like code. So these are some Qt-specific style sheets where you can actually style and reformat your interface. So I'm just going to paste a style sheet right here, mainly because this isn't really the purpose of the video, but I'm going to walk you through it. And of course, it's going to be available in the source code when I add it to the description. So as soon as I upload the video, you can directly copy paste this and add it to your style sheet. So what I did is I set a background color for my Q widget. This will set the background color for the background widget, so for the background of my application. Next, what I did is I'm going to add a different background color for the list widget itself, change the margin and the font, and then do the same for the button. So for the button, I also changed a background color, changed the margin left and margin right, and also changed the font. Now let me actually copy this and cancel, because I want to just show you the difference, why we're actually changing the margin. Let me run it. So as you can see that this border that we have right here is existent in QtDesigner, but we don't actually see it in Python when we run the application. So we're missing this border, and the border itself is actually pretty nice because it separates the checklist from the rest of the application. So how are we going to fix this? We're going to add the margin using the style sheet that I showed you. So if I go back here, change the style sheet and paste this exact style sheet all over again, I press apply. Again, you can copy paste this from the source code. I'm just going to press OK and save. So here, as you can see, it looks kind of different. Let's go back to the code and run it. So as you can see right here, we have the font has changed. It's much bigger. We have a new background color and a new sort of foreground color, you could say, for both the list widget and the button. And you can see it looks different. And the margin itself is this part right here. So it separates the list widget from the rest of the application. Again, it's still responsive and resizable, so you can resize the screen as you see fit. Alright, so that's really it for this video. I hope you found it useful, and I hope that you now are able to create a checklist with PyQt5, write some manipulating functions, as well as reformat this checklist to make it look more presentable, or as presentable as we did in this video. Alright, so thank you so much for watching. I'll see you in the next one, and bye bye.